see yourself as a storyteller first. Anything else you'd like to use, like a PowerPoint or recording a video, those complement the story. But it's the story that should come first, and you're the storyteller. And no one can take that away from you. No AI model can replicate your unique lived experience. And no other human has your unique lived experience. It's yours and yours alone.
Carmine, welcome back. Welcome back to the show.
Thank you, Andrea. It's great to see you. I always enjoy your listeners because they're entrepreneurs and business leaders. So I call them learn-it-alls. I don't know if you've ever heard that phrase. I got it from Satya Nadella at Microsoft. He said, better to be a learn-it-all than a know-it-all. And the people who gravitate to this type of podcast certainly are those who have a growth mindset, constantly learning, constantly growing. So thank you for inviting me.
Oh, thank you again for being with us. I've heard that term from your latest, can I call it book, audiobook? It's audio only. By the way, I wanted to ask you, Carmine, Viral Voices, it's published now, and it's an audiobook. We will be, before we start talking about the ideas in the audiobook, just out of curiosity, what made you choose to go for an audio only version this time?
Well, Macmillan Audiobook is a huge publisher of audiobooks, and they published several of my last books in audiobook form. As you know, within the publishing industry, the audiobook category is growing very well. So more and more readers are gravitating to audiobooks, and many of my latest books are on audiobooks. There's a difference, though, and this is what I've learned, and I don't think everyone understands the differentiation. An audiobook is mostly a print book that's read. If it's fiction, they embellish it a little bit with actors and music. If it's nonfiction, it's typically the author reading the book. That's an audiobook. Now there's a new subgenre that continues to grow called audio originals. And this, as a communicator, is a real fascinating area for me because they are limited series audiobooks that are focused specifically on like one topic. In this case, it would be persuasion and communication and storytelling. But it gives you the ability to create for audio first. Think of it as a cross between a podcast, because it's not ongoing, it's limited series, and an audiobook. So it's a cross in between. But it really takes advantage of the audio format. So I can interview neuroscientists and experts, and then I can cut to like archival video or archival audio of what we were talking about, whether it's historical or contemporary. It just gives you a little more flexibility, and for the topic of communication, it fits very well. And the name is called Viral Voices. So your listeners can get it anywhere they listen to this podcast, anywhere they get this podcast, or they buy their audiobooks, they'll find Viral Voices.
And I've listened to it, of course, as always, Carmine, fantastic work. One of the things that you talk about in this audio original is that if you think about what's happening with AI, the impact of AI and technology on communication, you say that the tools, the platforms have changed, and they will continue to change, but the principles have not. And I'm quoting you here. You say that the art of persuasion has not changed for more than 2,000 years. Tell me more.
Aristotle, the father of persuasion, gave us the formula that all persuasive speakers used today, and they used them 2,300 years ago when Aristotle first put them down. That formula, though, for speech making, and we can get into that a little later, but the point is that the same formula is used in viral videos that people make on TikTok. So, for example, I spoke to TikTok influencers and social media influencers for this audiobook, and they took me through the process. I asked them, how do you make these videos that continue to generate millions of views? How do you do it? And one person took me through a structure or a pattern that was instantly recognizable to me. I don't think they knew what they were doing intentionally, but it was recognizable to me because it's an ancient structure. And that was more of a 3-act structure. He said, if you want to explain financial topics to people who don't understand, you start with the status quo, give people a pain point. Here is how they live today. Give them a challenge, a problem with the way they live today, and then offer a solution. That's just a perfect 30-second video. And I said, yeah, that's the 3-act structure. That goes back to the hero's journey, Thomas Campbell mythology. And he looked at me like, he had no idea what I was talking about. So the point is that I think people are reaching the same conclusions, maybe from different areas. I'm reaching the conclusion from being a student of classical communication techniques for 20 years. Some of these viral video influencers are reaching the conclusions from their experience, but we're all reaching the same outcomes. And neuroscientists have told me this too. So I really believe very strongly now that the tools of communication have changed. The human brain has not. Because if you understand how the brain communicates, how it processes information, then you will be far more effective on any platform, whether it's writing or whether it's creating a video for social media or giving a presentation. I had some really interesting interchanges with neuroscientists. One neuroscientist in particular, I would ask him questions about TikTok, for example. And I don't think he was an expert on TikTok, but he had answers for everything. I would say, why is it that people on TikTok move a lot? In fact, if you go to TikTok and there are people who are teach you how to do better videos, movement is really good. That's why those recipe videos do really well. Cooking videos, demonstrations, movement is good. It keeps your attention. So I asked this neuroscientist who's been studying the brain for 40 years from an evolutionary standpoint, why do you think that is? He had an answer. He has an answer for everything on TikTok. He said, oh, well, that's obvious, because when our ancestors were walking the Serengeti, they would look for movement. Anything that moves would catch your attention because it's a potential threat. In other words, you should focus on that. If it's not moving and it's just static in your environment, it's something you can ignore. That makes perfect sense, Carmine. In other words, every time I ask them about something related to social media, even though they weren't experts in that medium, they understood why things worked. Why do they understand it? Because they understand the brain better than the rest of us.
They're neuroscientists. Are you referring to John Medina?
John Medina is one of the many neuroscientists I've talked to. He's one of my mentors, and I told him point blank, I said, you are the science teacher I wish I'd had, because he makes science fun. But yes, he's one of them, absolutely.
One of them. I was asking because we had John on this podcast as well some time ago.
So you would agree with me, best science teacher you'd ever have.
100%. And now you mentioned Aristotle, and when we think of Aristotle, the as you said, the father of persuasion, ethos, pathos, logos, we've heard those 3 words a lot. Now, what does this mean for a business person, an entrepreneur, a business leader, a business professional who need, in that day-to-day communication, how can they apply this idea of ethos, pathos, logos in their business presentations, day-to-day business communication?
There are 2 frameworks that we can talk about. One came from Aristotle, one came from Joseph Campbell and the hero's journey. They're slightly different frameworks, but they overlap. So let's get back to Aristotle. Aristotle believed that all great communication, all great speeches have 3 elements, or a speech maker has 3 elements. Ethos, logos, pathos. Ethos was character or credibility. In contemporary society, let's say you're not giving a speech, but you're giving a presentation. Ethos would be your character. It's what precedes you. Do people believe that this person's words back their actions? Okay. I'm going to assume that for all of our listeners, you have that. Check. You have credibility. Logos is the facts and the information that you bring to the table. And pathos was an emotion. Well, we've proven this in the lab since then. We have proven that people do not act on facts alone. Facts alone do not convince anyone to take action. They are supporting to the emotion. So if you can tap into people's emotion, you'll be far more effective as a speaker, as a communicator. The reason why we talk about stories now is because stories are the best vehicle that we have to transfer those emotions to one another. And again, that gets back to neuroscientists. You mentioned John Medina. John Medina told me, for reasons we're not entirely sure about, our brain locks into narrative. Anything that is packaged in a narrative or story form is something that we are locked into. Now, other neuroscientists and other philosophers and historians like Yuval Noah Harari, who I also interviewed, have said there's a reason for that from an evolutionary perspective. Sapiens, his best-selling book, he said sapiens became the dominant species on the planet because they had a unique ability. Not that they were stronger, not that they had bigger brains or bigger hands, or stronger muscles or bigger fangs. Okay, we didn't have all of this physical stature as other pre-humans, but we did have the ability to use language in a unique way to tell stories. And stories created myths. Stories also brought people together. Otherwise, how can you get millions of people who don't know each other to collaborate with each other? It's through our universal stories. So he's the one who gave me one of my best quotes. He said, storytelling is our superpower. That's why I think storytelling and Aristotle are both very important. So then I went into a little more advanced framework called the hero's journey, and we can get into that if you'd like. That's an advanced framework that is used to teach people how to tell better stories.
We will get to Campbell's hero's journey in a moment. Before we do that, Carmine, if we stay here in the idea of storytelling is our superpower, in your book, you give a great example that illustrates how storytelling can be used again in day-to-day business communication. The example of the Y Combinator partner, her origin story, why she founded. I think it was her company in the medical field, if I remember well. Would you mind sharing something about the example? Because it's a great illustration of this is not just a theoretical concept. We can use it in our day-to-day business communication.
Sure. Y Combinator, for people who don't know, is here in Silicon Valley, where I am. Actually, they're in San Francisco, a little further away from me. Y Combinator is an early-stage investment firm, and they are well known for literally starting companies like Airbnb, Edit, Dropbox, Stripe, and many others. What Y Combinator does is they accept entrepreneurs into the program, the highly, highly selective. They work with them for about 3 months, and then they present them, or they let them present to real investors. So that's kind of the business model. They invest a little in the company, and they mentor them, and then they send them off into the world. So the partners at Y Combinator are really influential. They're already people who have excelled in the startup world. One partner in particular I interviewed for Viral Voices. Her name is Surbi Sarna. At the age of 24, she started a healthcare company, a diagnostics company that was involved in early detection of ovarian cancer. She later sold that company to Boston Scientific, a much bigger device company, for $275 million. That's the story. I just gave you a story, and that's a true story. But that's not the most interesting part of the story. The interesting part is the background, the origin story. I was far more fascinated by the fact that Serby was 13 years old. She was in high school. She went through a really scary healthcare crisis where she believed, the doctors led her to believe that she might have ovarian cancer. It didn't turn out to be that way, but she said it really scarred her. The experience did. And she also began to realize, even at an early age, of the gap in therapeutics and in healthcare for women and women's issues. So she had that in the back of her head. And in college, she decided to focus on medicine and healthcare. When she left college, she started this company to fill that gap that she realized and identified when she was 13 years old. That's a more interesting story. But she's also someone who's learning. She was learning how to pitch and present. She got involved with, she met a very influential Silicon Valley investor. And when they were going through her pitch, because I think he was an early investor, he believed in her company, but he wanted to bring her out to bigger investors, she was reluctant to tell that background story. She was just focused on the technical aspects of her diagnostic treatment that she had discovered. The inventor. That's the inventor in her. Let me tell you about this invention. Instead, this investor must have intuitively understood the power of story and convinced her, no, you have to tell that story because that is the story that's going to connect you with investors, not just the facts alone. They want to trust the people they invest in. And stories, especially stories of struggle, stories of innovation, stories of people who may have faced a hurdle or a challenge and figured out a way out of it, solved problems, those build trust. So it was only because this investor suggested, Serby, tell a story, that she began to feel more comfortable telling that story. Which reminds me, Andrea, I just don't think that many business people and entrepreneurs see themselves as storytellers. That's more of a creative art. That's for novelists and screenwriters. That's not me giving a presentation. What I'm saying is, it is you. See yourself as a storyteller first. Anything else you'd like to use, like a PowerPoint or a recording of video, those complement the story. But it's the story that should come first, and you're the storyteller. And no one can take that away from you. No AI model can replicate your unique lived experience. And no other human has your unique lived experience. It's yours and yours alone.
We are storytellers, and you just said when it comes to telling stories, you say tell especially the stories of struggle, failures, obstacles you had to overcome, lessons learned. And in the can I call it book or the audio original, you talk about one of the something which is connected to this. You call it All Is Lost, which is a kind of I think you call it baits. You want to include baits, like memorable baits in your communication. One of them, it's not the only one that you go through, but one of them is called All Is Lost. And there, I think, if I remember well, you also give the Airbnb example there. For those who are not familiar with it, tell me more about this idea. All is lost.
Yes, let me start from the top. So this is an element of storytelling. Within all stories, watch your favorite Hollywood movie, you will find a scene, an event, where it looks as though the hero or the protagonist have hit rock bottom. In screenwriting, some people call it the all is lost moment. It appears as though the hero will not get out of this. They've hit the rock bottom. This is it. It's the end of the film. No more. For example, Luke Skywalker, Princess Leia, and the team stuck in the trash compactor, and they were about to get crushed by the compactor in the Death Star. Okay, so people in every great movie, there's always that one moment where it doesn't look like it's going to work out. Rom-coms do this all the time, romantic comedies. There's always that one moment when something happens and it doesn't look like the two are going to get together. Anyway, it's a very well-established Hollywood trick or tactic. All good stories have an all is lost moment to be a good story, because you really have to get people immersed in the struggle that maybe you've gone through to reach where you are today or to reach a conclusion. So, for example, you mentioned Airbnb. So Brian Chesky, the CEO of Airbnb, he's a skilled storyteller. He understands a story on a real design level, and he designs Airbnb as a storytelling culture. But when he tells the Airbnb story publicly, he goes through the whole thing about the friends who rent an air mattress and they discover that, hey, there might be a market for this. And they start renting out their air mattress to people who are coming through town for conferences. Airbnb, renting out a room or your couch. That's how it kind of started. Once they started the company, though, there were hard times. It was really difficult to build Airbnb. And he often repeats this incident or event that he remembers. He said it got so bad we couldn't even afford milk for our Cheerios. Now, Andre, you got to, as a communication coach, you ask yourself, why does he say that? Why is he saying milk and Cheerios instead of something a little bit more generic, like, we struggle financially, but eventually we made it? It's because when you provide that kind of detail and it seems authentic, one, it grabs people's attention because, again, we're kind of wired to pay attention to stories of struggle or threats, and it speaks to our need to survive. It also acts as a simulator, puts you in that position. What would I have done in that situation? Or it resonates with you. I know, I've been there. And then, of course, he turns it into a lesson learned. He goes, but despite this financial period we were in, we were able to pivot and we weren't going to let anything stop us from achieving our goal. That helps you build trust in the speaker. So the more research I've been doing in storytelling, I realize it's all about trust. That's why AI can generate a story. It can put words together to create a story, but it can't create trust between two people. That has to come from unique lived experiences. So this whole idea of the all is lost moment, if there's one in your origin story, or even if it's a product, doesn't even have to be about you. It can be, here are a lot of the challenges we had to overcome to reach this place where we're in today. That builds trust in you as the speaker, because now people can look at you as the speaker, they can look at you as a leader and say, I want to be a part of this person's journey. I trust them. They hit hurdles, but they find solutions.
Often, instead, what I see is that without a solid understanding of the principles that you talk about, we tend to, if normally there is no storytelling or very little storytelling, if there is some storytelling in our communication, it's mostly about the things that went well. We don't like to talk about the things that didn't go as planned.
You just reminded me of something. Oh my goodness, this is great. Okay, remember you just said we don't like to talk about the things that don't do well. All right? I'm going to give you an example of another person who I interviewed. His name is Jim McKelvey. He is the co-founder of Square, now called Block, but Square is the mobile payment system that merchants use to take credit card payments on mobile devices. Everyone has seen them, the small white, little Square tablets. He had a slide. He showed me the slide. I still have it. The slide, when he presented Square for the first time, he showed a slide, and on it, it said 140 reasons why this idea will fail. 140 reasons. And I said, okay, Jim, come on. Most people go up there and they talk about how much money they're going to make. And they always over-exaggerate. He said, that's the point. Everyone expects that. Every investor expects the hyperbole, the overestimation of revenue and growth. And they roll their eyes because they know it's not going to happen. It's probably not true. Okay? And this time, we went in there and flipped the script. 140 reasons why we'll fail. In other words, Again, trust.
Trust.
It gave the investors trust that these people have figured it all out. Guess what happened next? The investors in the room got involved in the presentation, and they stopped them at the presentation and said, well, wait a minute, we could probably fix this if we do X, Y, and Z. Thank you, Bob. What a great idea. And then pretty soon people started to get a little ownership over it. And they had a real discussion like it was, okay, these are problems. I think we can fix these problems.
Before we continue with this episode, I just want to share a few resources that I think will be super useful for you. The first one is check out either my book, Confident Presenter, or my colleague Phil Wakenall's book, Business Presentation Revolution, or both. These are books for business owners and leaders who want to take their presentation skills to a higher level. To make the most of the books, take the Confident Presenter Scorecard, which is an online tool that allows you to assess your presentation skills for free in less than 3 minutes. And then also, at the moment, I'm running a series of free presentation skills web classes, and I'd love to see you there. The links are in the show notes. Now let's go back to the episode. There's another thing that Square did in their pitch that I learned in your audio original, which was an excellent example of what you call a wow moment.
Mm-hmm.
By any chance, Carmine, do you remember that particular thing that they did in their pitch? Otherwise, I can.
Yes, no, I know exactly what it is. It wasn't just it was a wow moment, that one moment that's going to grab people's attention. So the 140 reasons why we'll fail, that's one wow moment. What Jim McKelvey taught me is you have to engineer moments of attention. People are going to forget most of what you say. So you have to go into a presentation or into a communication experience ahead of time, engineering what you hope people are going to remember. So focus on a few key things that people will remember. Now, here is the way he engineered the moment of attention. True story. It was amazing. Square, you've seen Square. You may not be able to picture it, but now you'll picture it next time. So when someone takes your credit card and they're a waitress or waiter walking around a restaurant, they'll put it through a small device attached to the mobile phone. That's Square, or a Square-like device. When Jim McKelvey first invented it, and he invented that technology, he had two different versions. One was a large version that worked 100% of the time. So it was stable. You would swipe your credit card and it always worked, because part of the investment pitch was demonstrating this. So they had to show that this worked. But he also invented another one that was much smaller, and so small that no one had ever seen anything like it. I mean, literally, right, a stamp size, maybe a little bigger. And it did not work 100% of the time. It worked 80% of the time. But they decided that during the investment pitches, they would bring the smaller one in, because that's the one that got noticed. That's the one that created buzz. People talked about it. The big one wouldn't have been as interesting, but it's the small one that caught people's attention. Sort of like the iPod. Remember that famous thing with Steve Jobs? And he said that the world's smallest music player, and it's so small, it can fit inside my pocket. No one had ever seen a music player that small. We had the old Sony music players, that were quite large because they would play a disc. It's the same type of approach. But you see what Jim was doing. He's being very deliberate about communication. He realizes ahead of time most people are going to forget almost everything they said in the pitch. So let's deliberately create that moment of attention that no one will forget.
And what I found so interesting was that in that pitch, he asked the investors, because as you said, they had to demonstrate that this thing was working at least 80% of the time. And he asked the investors to take out their credit cards and make a payment. Investors were there, and they, without even realizing, but they had to make a payment to attend their presentation, which was a bit of a crazy idea. but I found it so
You did
interesting.
listen to the audiobook. You did listen to it. Very
The
good.
whole thing, yeah.
That was the third wow moment. So do you see how he engineered wow moments? And what Andrea is talking about is at the beginning of the presentation, they took people's credit cards and swiped them and actually took out something like $1 or $5 immediately from their credit cards that they could see. And they showed it to them. And some investors were a little taken aback. They weren't quite sure what to do with that. They didn't like it, but it didn't matter, see, because it got everybody's attention. Okay. Wow, you could do that quickly in such a small device. So he said there were 3 moments of attention, exactly like you said. There was, let's take people's credit cards and actually swipe it and pull out $1, unexpected. Let's put up a slide that says we have 140 reasons why we'll fail. And third was, let's take out the smaller device that doesn't work as well because we know it'll grab people's attention. And in those 3 moments, those are the moments that people would remember. If they just had a PowerPoint slide like everybody else has, and there were 72 slides and a lot of technical data and some financials that were overblown, who knows? Who knows? Who knows if they would have been funded? But that pitch, according to Jim McKelvey, was so good that they began to circulate across Silicon Valley. And I'm grateful for the fact that Jim McKelvey actually said he had used one of my books to help prepare for that pitch. That's very gratifying, although he never gave me pre-IPO shares in Square. Funny how that works out.
Wow moments, something that's impossible to ignore. And another thing that you mentioned in the book is that if you don't do those things, people will, you also said it now, people will forget most. You give a start, which is a bit alarming should be a bit alarming for any presenter, but also motivating for us to do a better job, which is that people tend to forget even 90%, sometimes even more, of what we say during a presentation a couple of days from that presentation. So that's also why we need to include those things. Carmine, I'd like to
Yeah,
go.
that's science that's backed up by several different researchers and 2 different scientists who I interviewed, that people do forget most of what you say or what you present a couple of days later. So and Jim McKelvey knew that intuitively. So the point is, reverse engineer what people are going to remember before you create the presentation.
Yeah, you need to be intentional about it.
And I don't care if it's if people forget 90% or 87%, but the research is pretty consistent on it. People will forget most of what they hear, especially in a presentation.
Yeah. Now, at the beginning of this conversation, you mentioned a couple of times another framework when it comes to storytelling, narrative, the hero's journey, Joseph Campbell. Now, when it comes to the hero's journey, for anyone who is interested in these ideas, for anyone who is passionate about communication, we know of the hero's journey. Having good conversations with people, and especially business professionals, business leaders, what they find difficult is to understand how to apply that framework again in their business presentations, in their day-to-day business communication. Can you help us with this?
Yeah, I don't think everyone is familiar with the hero's journey. Only people who are in the writing or creative like we are. Some people are a little more obsessed with the hero's journey than others. Like I'm obsessed with it. I'll read a 400-page book on the thing. But most business professionals, even if they've heard of it, they don't understand how it applies. It actually applies very, very well. But big picture, hero's journey is a storytelling framework that was identified by Joseph Campbell in the 90s. He's a mythologist. And he identified the pattern of all epic stories. That pattern has now been adapted into Hollywood movies. Joseph Campbell had 17 stages. It got very complex. Someone else Vogler, I think, took it into about 15 stages, and then a few other screenplay writers started adapting it for different types of movies. But a lot of people within the screenwriting industry know about the hero's journey. At its simplest form, it simply means that A great story always starts with a hero in an ordinary world who, through some incident, they call it the inciting incident, gets transformed into a special world where they encounter villains, hurdles, obstacles, challenges. They return to their ordinary world transformed. They bring the elixir. It can be the treasure, in ancient stories, they bring home a real treasure, gold, or they can bring home newfound wisdom to help people do things better and help their community. That's the big picture of the hero's journey. Well, I've noticed that great speakers in almost every category follow the hero's journey pattern, whether they're doing it intentionally or not. And I think that's the whole point about the hero's journey. Frankly, the hero's journey works because it is the way we see our lives. So it shouldn't be surprising that good communicators who are storytellers and speakers will track the hero's journey. Let me give you an example. One of the great communicators of our time in technology right now is Jensen Huang, who is the CEO of NVIDIA, the world's most valuable company. $5 trillion company, powers AI. So without NVIDIA, you're not on ChatGPT. NVIDIA powers everything right now. I'm sure everybody's heard of it. Take a look at Jensen Huang, especially when he does interviews. You may want to look him up on YouTube. He's very interesting because here's a guy who's a technologist. He invented these processors and chips that are the backbone of modern artificial intelligence. And yet when he tells the origin story, when people ask him about how did NVIDIA start, do you think he takes them to the new multi-billion-dollar campus in Silicon Valley and shows them around and shows them all of the cool technology that NVIDIA is introducing? No, he doesn't. He actually takes them back to a breakfast house. Now, I'm talking in the U.S. We have something called Denny's. It's American-style breakfast. You know exactly what those look like, Andrea. Well, when he was a teenager, he worked at Denny's. He worked as a busboy at Denny's, and he often liked to say that he was the best busboy Denny's ever had. He would clean those dishes perfectly, like there was no tomorrow. He would learn customer service from talking to customers and getting their orders. So he always takes people back to Denny's. And in fact, Denny's played a part in the origin of how NVIDIA got started. He met 3 friends who were all engineers at breakfast at Denny's. That's just where they went. They went to have unlimited coffee so they could sit there for hours and brainstorm, and pancakes. And he said it was over those conversations that we came up with the idea for NVIDIA. Now, was it a straight line to success? No, like we talked about. There were many all is lost moments. They were 30 days from losing everything, 30 days from running out of money, many, many, many times over many years. He brings up a lot of stories of how their first product failed. They sent out like 400,000 chips, 399,000 were returned. And the second product failed miserably. Third time they started to get some traction. But every time they had these hurdles, every time they had these ups and downs, what do you think would happen? They learned something. They learned something about the market. They learned how to make something better, which eventually positioned them perfectly for this new wave of something called artificial intelligence. And they bet the farm on that too. They made a major pivot from graphics chips, which were powering graphics and other type of computing, to the type of technology that they would need for artificial intelligence. So that tells you a lot. They're risk takers, but it also tells you a lot about his leadership, almost like he could see around corners. He could see what's coming and make those pivots. That builds a lot of trust in Jensen Huang. So I believe if you look at the coverage of Jensen Huang today, he is called charismatic. He's called a global leader that everybody wants to hear. I think there's a reason for that. There's a pattern. He's very in tune with the story and how the story motivates people and continues to offer lessons today.
I think one of the takeaways for our listeners is that if we think about it, we all have in our own story those ups and downs. We've got good moments, we've got obstacles, we've got challenges. But again, going back to what we said earlier, we tend to forget to be intentional about these, and the all is lost moments are as powerful, if not even more powerful than other elements.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about another framework. At some point in your audio original, you invite someone whose surname is the same as yours, Vanessa
Yes.
Gallo,
Yes.
and she talks about the AMP framework that she uses, that you use with your clients. AMP stands for ability, message, and practice. A couple
Got
of
it.
things there. One is, first of all, when it comes to message, the second element, I was so glad to hear from Vanessa, from you, that you think that story trumps delivery. Because often when we think about public speaking, many people start thinking about the delivery side of things, eye contact, body language, gestures, and all of these things, of course, are very important. But you say that the most important, you say, I'm just paraphrasing here, that without a story that resonates with the audience, it doesn't matter how good you are from a delivery perspective. Your delivery can amplify and should amplify your story. The other thing, and there's a question there, is on the third element, practice. There's a quote from Vanessa that I loved. She says that practice is not something you do because you are bad. Practice is something you do because you are good.
Yes.
And many people, especially in business, entrepreneurs, business leaders, tend not to practice. They don't rehearse. Tell me more about the importance of practice rehearsal for people who want to be good communicators.
Let's look at that AMP model. Vanessa Gallo is, you're right, same surname. She is my wife. She has a background in psychology, and she taught psychology. She's master's in psychology. She's been co-teaching with me at Harvard for 10 years now. We're celebrating our 10-year anniversary of teaching together in executive education at Harvard. And that's been a wonderful experience because we get to meet and work with global leaders, from different industries and different parts of the world. Vanessa's a better coach than me. I'm the writer. I'm the one who started thinking about storytelling, writing. I'm going to write books. I'm going to teach people how to write better, how to create better stories. She's more the coach because she's looking at it from a psychology perspective. So when we started working one-on-one with CEOs and senior executives, I was hyper-focused on the words, on the story. Let's fix this. How are we going to fix this? This slide is too busy. Let's fix it. It was all about how am I going to fix it? Vanessa had a different approach that turned out to be far, far more effective in building confidence in people. And so we nicknamed it AMP, amplify your presence. Amplify stands for ability, message, practice. The way she explains it, there are 3 variables in each of us as speakers. There are 3 variables that we can adjust. The first one is relatively stable. It's called ability. Every speaker comes to the table with natural ability. That's where we're hard on ourselves. It's very hard for us to identify those natural abilities. That's why it's good to have a coach, an outsider. And Vanessa's very good at just quietly watching people. She'll watch people in a room for a while, and then later she'll be able to say, so-and-so, you have this background, don't you? And they'll say, yeah, how did you know? Because she's identifying your strengths. Your strengths could be posture. Some people, when they're standing on a stage, they look really good posture. Maybe they have dance in their background, or performing arts, or a military background. Yeah, so that good posture. Other people may have a very good voice, deep, resonant, or interesting. Other people are very creative with their words. Her point is double down on those strengths. Those strengths are not going to leave you. In fact, they're only going to be amplified. So let's hold on to those, put them in a bucket. We've checked them off. The 2 variables that we can change to improve you as a communicator, depending on where you are message and practice. So that's why you're absolutely right. We do a little of body language, but most of it is going to be derived from the story you tell. If you can create a story that has a strong theme, that you tell stories, typically when you tell stories, you smile. You're a little more natural. The hand gestures just come naturally all of a sudden. That's why we focus on the message. If you're confident about the message, the rest will follow suit. That's what we find. Finally, practice, and that's the variable you could really adjust. Some people are naturally very comfortable in front of people, or maybe they've been able to memorize really, really well, so they can kind of look at their notes and know exactly what they're going to say. Maybe they need a little less practice than you do. Others are either they're introverts, or they're uncomfortable, or they have severe anxiety about public speaking. Those are the people you need to practice a lot more, because the more you practice, the more comfortable you'll be. And I mean practice, not just, oh, I'm going to flip through my slides 5 minutes ahead of the presentation. No, I mean weeks before the presentation. Get up, stand up, go through the whole presentation out loud. The next time, put yourself on video, record yourself, watch it back. The next time, invite a friend. The next time, invite 3 people to watch. The more you do it in front of people and add just a little bit of tension, a little stress, so that maybe you feel your palms sweat just a little bit, you'll build that confidence. And in my audiobook, Viral Voices, I interviewed people like former Navy SEALs or Navy SEAL commanders and other people who are psychologists and neuroscientists who say that is the way to get over any fear. You have to do it, but do it deliberately. Do it often enough to where when you do it in real life, it's not that bad. I already did it.
And very much connected to this, one of your recommendations, I find is so true for myself as a speaker, but also for our clients, is that for most people, on average, it takes about 10 rehearsals for them to be able to internalize the message, for them to be able to own it.
I agree.
Find it very
I think
true.
that's a minimum. I have found at least 10. You're doing pretty good. You're confident.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Carmine, now the audiobook was published on the 24th of February recently.
So it's out.
Out of curiosity, if you could go back, now it's out, it's published. If you could go back and change something, add something, remove something, improve something, would you do it, and what?
I think that happened naturally during the course of putting the audiobook together, because when we first came out with the idea, AI was a thing, but it was only during the course of the audiobook that I began to realize, because it's like a 2-year process, where more and more people were delegating their communication to AI. And that was obvious because it happened very, very fast. And I can see that in the conferences that I went to. And that became a problem because I realized, folks, you're delegating too much to AI. AI doesn't have your unique voice. It's not the same. It doesn't have human imagination. It can help you maybe condense, tighten, synthesize, rehearse, research. Fine, great. I use it too. It's terrific. But you're the storyteller. So you start with the story and then let AI maybe enhance it, but it's got to be your story first. And I realized that too many people were delegating everything to AI. Oh, just let AI create it. Well, guess what? If you do that, you sound like everybody else, because AI isn't imaginative. AI searches and scans a database of millions or billions of data points to predict what would be the most familiar thing, familiar story, the very next line. It's a prediction machine. That's what if you ask what I would have done differently, I did it differently. But about a year in, AI was not going to be a big part of this audiobook. When I first had the idea and we started writing the scripts and trying to get people, trying to solicit interviews. But later, and maybe you'll see this, you'll kind of get the idea in the audiobook, it's more weighted heavily toward neuroscientists and actual AI experts, because I think we really needed that portion.
You had, on that point, you had a conversation with Terry Zuplat, White House speechwriter for Barack Obama. He appeared on our podcast as well, and one of the things he says in his fantastic book, I think, Say It Well, he says that when you speak, you should give the talk that only you can give.
Yes,
You need to
right.
tell the story that only you can tell. And of
Mm-hmm.
course, yes, we should. I also use AI, but
Yeah, of course.
as an assistant, as an aid.
Well, it's like Grammarly, you know, before ChatGPT, Grammarly, which is now using AI, but Grammarly, I ran all my columns through Grammarly. It would tighten things and it would do more than find typos, and it would tighten and maybe even rearrange. And it's like, okay, yeah, I will accept that change. I like that. But it still came from me first. That's the point. And AI, the more I talk to AI scientists and neuroscientists, you learn that it is not anything like human imagination, not even close. So don't delegate to it. Keep your unique voice. Use it, like you said, as a tool or an assistant. But it doesn't have imagination, nor does it care about the outcome of its communication. It has no aspirations, no dreams for a better world. That comes from you, and other people have aspirations too. So you have to connect with people on that level. AI can structure words, it can generate words, but it cannot turn those words into inspiration. That has to come from you.
Carmine, let's close with this. You said earlier that people tend to forget most of the information that we share in our presentations, in our communication, maybe even 90%, maybe even more. Now, let's say that someone watches this episode, they listen to it. Most likely, it's not your fault, but that's what happens. A few days after this, a few weeks after this, they remember just one thing. Let's say that they remember just one thing. But if they remember that thing, you would be happy. If you think about what we've discussed today, what's the most important thing you'd like our listeners to remember?
Storytelling is your superpower. Because if you can remember storytelling is a superpower, then you'll hopefully remember some of the other details about why we are wired for story, why storytelling sets you apart from AI, what are some of the frameworks around storytelling that you can adapt, like the hero's journey. So think big picture. The one thing you want people to remember has to be more of an overarching theme. Everything else becomes subservient to the overarching theme. So when you think about what is the one thing I want people to leave from a conversation or a presentation, in this conversation, storytelling is your superpower.
Thank you, Karma. It's always a great pleasure to have conversations with you, to learn from you. I really appreciate your work. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Andrea.